The only reason I say that I can go in is I've been washed in the blood. Amen. I've been saved.
He had a giving personality.
Passionate as a preacher.
A dedicated man.
He was very animated.
I remember how compassionate he was.
And somebody who loved you and cared about you.
He was a mentor to me.
Would give me the advice that I needed.
He was real. He was real.
Compassion and generosity.
Stood up and spoke out and was bold.
He's nothing but a big teddy bear.
If Jesus Christ wasn't born, if he hadn't come, if he hadn't died, if he hadn't resurrected, if he didn't give us a Bible, there'd be no Christmas.
Our school was short on funds, and it came time to pay the teachers for their work, for the 2 weeks. And they were young staff. They had bills to pay. They had house payments, and there wasn't money to pay them. And all of a sudden, we all got our checks because he had gone out and mortgaged his home in order to get the money to pay the teachers their salaries. What a wonderful thing to do.
So my brother Mark, he got in some trouble with my dad, and we had just started attending Cleveland Baptist, and his answer was to run away from home. But Roy Thompson's preaching was intriguing to him, and so though he had run away from home, he would come back and sit in the balcony, listen to the preaching, and then leave before the invitation started, so my parents didn't know he was there. And after 2 weeks, he stayed, and he walked the aisle during the invitation. He got saved.
If he was going to say something, besides giving the Lord, of course he'd give the Lord the glory, but he'd say Grandma. There were so many times that Grandma could have given him a hard time for, he'd bring strangers home, or the money he'd give away. He'd always say, you cannot give God, and they would be broke lots of times because he had given their money to a missionary or family in need. But Grandma never once complained. She never once criticized. I never heard her grumble. Just, she was a godly woman behind him. There was a time I know where he and Grandma, there was a couple over in the Philippines getting married and didn't have money for wedding rings, and they gave them their wedding rings.
He stood up in our pulpit, and the place was packed in Dublin, Ireland, and the first things out of his mouth was, I don't see how anyone in their right mind can stay affiliated with an institution that covers up scandals like the Roman Catholic Church. And I started to sweat and I got nervous, but you know what? When the service was closed, 2 people trusted Christ as their Savior. Only Pastor Thompson could get away with something like that.
Whether the church had money or not, if a missionary came through, he would help that missionary. Such a giving person, and he just felt that everybody should be taken care of.
He was somebody that not only we here at Cleveland Baptist Church provided a great amount of reverence to as our pastor, but even within the community. I remember an event in 1980, Ronald Reagan was holding one of his only primary campaign stops on Public Square. There were people within the Reagan campaign that contacted Cleveland Baptist Church and Dr. Thompson to come down and perform the opening prayer of that campaign event.
I remember one time he went to down south to hold a meeting, and on the way back he stopped at my brother-in-law's house, which was 50 miles out of his way. My brother-in-law Bill, he had been coming here all those years and never did get saved. Bill got saved that day. He went on serving the Lord and still does.
A missionary was here, and he had crossed his legs, and Pastor saw a hole in the bottom of his shoe, and he took his shoes off and gave to him.
He had given some money to my husband and said, I want your kids to have some presents and stuff for Christmas. And he gave him money to get some extra groceries for the holiday season, and so that we could buy some things for our kids.
Our son-in-law was very sick, and every time Brendan called, in the middle of the night or early morning, he was there.
Distinctly remember the moment we were together and going out to make a visit, and we had stopped at a traffic light, and he looked at me and he said, Kevin, I've been praying for a while that God would send a young man that I could train and prepare to be my successor. And he said, I believe you may be that young man. well, that was just an overwhelming moment for me. And you know, of course, his willingness to invest in me just meant the world.
My father-in-law was a preacher that I could go to. I always said he was the little guy's preacher. He didn't care about hobnobbing with the big guys. He loved just to be with the young guys that had a heart. And that passion and that love for young men is something that I'll never forget. And I'll remember many times picking up the phone and saying, I just don't know what to do. And I gotta be honest, there's still a lot of days when I wish I could just pick up the phone and say, hey preacher, he's not here, but I could still hear a lot of what he said and remember what a lot he said as a young man, as a preacher. And for that, I'll be forever grateful.
You couldn't have found somebody that loved what God called them to do more than he did. And this church was his life. And I just think, I mean, everything he did was all about letting God use him, and he was so passionate about everything he did. And I don't think you can ever capture the passion he had for this place, because this is where God called him, and he just loved it with all his heart. And
you know, he'd accomplished a lot. He had a good deal of influence, political influence with business people, influence in the religious community, but just completely humble.
A lot of fun to be around. I have pictures of him go-karting with us and just playing games and getting in with the teens and having fun.
You could see him, you know, as a real person. You didn't feel like you were inferior. You felt like you were equal to him. You know, he made you feel comfortable, you know, that you could confide in him, and that it wouldn't go any further than that. He was like an advocate in your corner.
And he would often swing his arms, and I remember one time we always had a glass of water up there on the platform, and he got so excited he flung his right arm and hit the glass of water. It hit the tile that was on the floor and shattered the glass, and the water went all over the place. Didn't stop him, he kept right on going.
He preached his last sermon from a chair. And my mom said, he said to her on the way home, he said, that was my last message, I'm ready to go now. And he went home to be with the Lord early that Monday morning. So it was almost the Lord, like the Lord gave him a little bit of a say when he was ready to go.